Tia, thank you so much. Colleagues, what I'd like to do now is give a visual overview of the report that you have on your tables. But obviously, I'm not going to say exactly what is in the report. That would be very dull indeed. Exactly the kind of teaching that Andreas was not advocating. It's particularly joyful for me to welcome a few colleagues who are also part of our broader advisory group. So Pam Bernard and Michael Anderson, you've heard, have already got in there first with a couple of questions, but also Laura McBain, you'll hear later on today, and obviously Stefan too, who's been, and may I thank you, Stefan, publicly hugely supportive of our efforts so far. As I go through what I'm about to say, it's a bit like giving a speech at a wedding where you thank everybody and then you realise that you've forgotten the two most critical people. And so, for example, I'm not going to mention Estonia, although I know they're doing brilliant things. I'm not going to mention some of the usual suspects. So if you're sitting here thinking, why on earth didn't he talk about that? It's because I only have 25 minutes and I'm going to use them as energetically as I possibly can, knowing that even if I speak quite fast, you can then come back and look at the report later on. Once upon a time, if you'd sailed down the Seine to the coast and headed south, and let's say we're in the Middle Ages, the extent of your geographic knowledge would have been, the science of geography would have been that you would have fallen off the Earth. The Earth was a two-dimensional place, and in this rather amusing graphic, a dragon underneath would have bitten you on the bottom as you plummeted downwards from the imagined hard stop. That, for me, this image is an image of education and how it's changed over the world, from the 3 R's that I was talking about and the 3 C's that I was dreaming about. Once upon a time, the prevailing image for education was the tabula rasa, or the empty vessel. We knew what they needed to know, and we just got it off our desk onto their desks. That doesn't work anymore. That was the web and weft of what Andreas was saying. And I'd like you, therefore, to have that image of what does it look like in a three-dimensional, rounded, global educational world if we're going to make these kind of changes stick. Spoiler alert, what I've tried to do in the report is to give, and it's a personal, it's imperfect, it's a snapshot, so again, forgive me if your favourite aspect of whichever lever you think we can pull on isn't widely enough or graciously enough applauded, just forgive me and say, well, that was Bill's judgment. I have done my level-headed best to look at anything that was publicly available online in English and to use quite extensive networks, some of which are in this room, also the Lego Foundation and 100 and a number of other really good global bodies who bring these kind of promising practices to our note. So the spoiler alert would be that largely through the work of OECD and PISA, the status is increasingly less contested. That's the left hand. So this is a rather crude traffic light metric here. So if you were going to chunk up that little hub into 5, it's a 4 out of 5. Don't get me wrong, we're not going to go into the numerics of my marking system here. When it comes to curricula, in terms of the rhetoric, we're pretty good too. And when it comes to culture, curriculum design and pedagogy, we're getting pretty good at knowing what needs to be done. I agree with Andreas totally that on the ground, this isn't always the case. And then as we move from left to right, I think the work that Mario and his team that have been doing here at Creative Thinking work has greatly advanced our understanding of assessment, just as the work that Patrick Griffin did on collaborative problem solving greatly advanced that. But when it comes to professional learning, I give you the big weakness that I see. That is whether it's pre-service, in-service, or the training of school leaders. I think we have a real job of work, so I'll be interested to see your reactions there. As I was nearing the end of my labour writing this, I wondered what school report I would have written if creative thinking was a girl in my class. So here is her end-of-year school report. Over the last few years, the student has made significant progress and her efforts have been widely appreciated. To realise her potential, she now needs to concentrate on curriculum design, pedagogy and assessment. Her biggest challenge will be the realization of the scale of the challenge. That was coming out in those questions earlier on, I think, ahead, and her willingness to focus on the professional learning needed to succeed in the years ahead. Well, sadly, creative thinking isn't a bright and capable young woman, but let's just imagine from time to time that she is. If we start with the status barometer, it's quite high. It's quite high through the work of a number of significant individuals, the late and much lamented Sir Ken Robinson, who had been saying this for a very long while, and OECD and a number of other organisations represented around this table. If you look at global curricula, you don't have to go very far, whether it's the World Economic Forum or the Centre for Curriculum Redesign. There's a broad consensus that there's some stuff that you might think of as foundational literacies or knowledge, and there's some stuff that are the 2 or 3 or 4 or 7 C's. You know, we don't need to come to blows over this. We know roughly what these are, and whether we call one innovation or entrepreneurship or teamwork rather than collaboration is really not the big issue. There are also some other things that are sometimes termed character, but are ultimately about what it is to be a good person and what it is to be a good learner. And I think we can't miss that heavenly triangle. So we cannot divorce curriculum from pedagogy, from culture, from progression, and from assessment. And those have become separate bedfellows. They're sleeping in different rooms in the hotel, and we need to bring them all back into the creative, I'm mixing my metaphors now, into hotel creative thinking. I almost said California, but stopped myself in time. The Brookings Institution has done, I think, some of the best work in tracking the progress here, and you'll see that in terms of rhetoric, we're doing pretty well. But if you just highlight in terms of creativity and critical thinking, in terms of pedagogy and assessment, the overt, public, evidence-based statements of how you do this stuff, they're a bit thin on the ground. So one of the things at GEOC we want to be doing is thinking about this, this lever of bottom-up and top-down, and how we can bring these not competing but collaborating pressures to be brought to bear. Back in 2012, we were tasked by Creativity, Culture and Education with looking at the literature of creativity and synthesizing that to develop a school-based model, one of the first, not the only, but one of the first, and then trialling that in schools. Here's Thomas Tallis School in South London, who've made an extensive development of it. It's circular, which I think is quite important, compared to a school timetable, which is rectangular. It's very easy to see who gets the most airtime on a school timetable. It's much more difficult to see that there. That's quite deliberate. These things are interrelated. They are like thinking like a creative individual, as Andreas was saying, or thinking like an engineer, or thinking like a scientist. They are creative habits of mind, which of course have deep knowledge, they have skills, and they have these wider habits of mind or dispositions or attributes. Then thanks so much to Stefan, who was on our advisory group. An OECD paper took this to a wider audience, and that was what gave me the privilege to start to work more closely with Mario and his team around creative thinking here. And many colleagues in the project that Stefan led are around the table, and it's lovely to see you. And there's an evidence-based handbook aimed at the teaching profession. The model is now in more than 30 countries across the world, which is really exciting, and often with our friends Creativity, Culture and Education, who've been the deliverers of that. I think we should acknowledge, I hope it has been acknowledged, the prestige that has been brought to this area by the work that Stefan and colleagues have led, the Fostering Students' Creativity and Critical Thinking at CERI, and the work that Mario and colleagues are leading, which isn't just the test. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a number of really interesting pieces of work we're doing to bring this to a wider audience and to make the assessment literacy, the stock of assessment literacy in teachers rise, and for that literacy often to be formative, not summative. More of that, I'm sure, anon as we go through. The second of my 5 is to look at curriculum, to look at the way these kind of things are appearing. And here's a quick dash across the world. So apologies in advance if your favorite country is not here. I've chosen 12 educational jurisdictions out of 23 that are featured in the report. And I'm going to try and tease out 10 common infrastructure themes that I've noticed when it comes to scaling up. And I'm going to start, and I've organised them for ease of political fairness in alphabetic order. So we will start in Australia. Australia has set the tone since the Melbourne Declaration, in my view, and has this nice cuboid notion, back to the web and weft metaphor I was using, that you need these foundational disciplines, but then there's the web and the weft, then you need these, what they would call capabilities, dispositions, clusters of skills, competencies. The language is feral at the moment, and it's not settled because we're in a period of innovation. Why would you expect it to? That's the excitement. And then the national body, ACARA, saying, here's what critical and creative thinking is. And then, because it's a state matter, Victoria and other states saying, no, it isn't. In Victoria, creative and critical thinking is this. And it's a simpler version of what you've guys done at the centre. And here's my first take-home point. We cannot do this unless we begin to have rigorous continua, looking at scope and sequence over the lifetime of formal education. What I think Victoria's done very smartly is group this around 2 years. If you look at Michael Fullan's work, he does it in terms of progression more generally without any age range. I think that's up for us to discuss. But I would suggest that in this overview, we've got to do more of this. And I'm delighted that we just got money in England to map this against the national curriculum and to create a progression document for Key Stage 2 and 3. That's from age 7 up to age 14 in English schools. More of that anon. There are some absolutely fantastic schools. Here is my favourite in the western suburbs, sparing Michael's blushes. Root Hill High School, low SES, really doing the most extraordinary things. And noticing that their pathways, these students into universities, seems to be less effortful, and 2 or 3 years into their university life, well, guess what? They're not crashing and burning. They're not falling out because they've got that more brittle, minus growth mindset ability to survive the real world, for goodness sake, or at least the real world of academia. Here's some of Michael's brilliant work focusing on the way that curiosity, playfulness, and critical thinking inhabit. And Michael's wheel here is my second point, which is that almost every country that's doing this frames it in the concept, in the context of wider capabilities or competencies. It's quite difficult to see how you don't do that. Otherwise, you frankly, as an educator, lose the plot. So you need something to aggregate it up. So you might be thinking biology, chemistry, and physics. Oh, that's all part of science. Or you might be thinking geography. Oh, is that a humanities? And how wide are my humanities? That is the way the human organising mind works, and I think we should go with the grain. Here in Canada, I've dived straight into a state level. So Canada, again, has a framing of a competence-based approach, and one of my favourite states is Alberta, and this is the third take-home point, that if you don't do it, somebody will have to do it. So the state of Alberta has mapped mathematics against each of the competencies. So if you're a busy teacher, you don't have to go back to the drawing board. I'll show you a slide from the Creativity Exchange. We feature quite a lot of this global practice. It's the kind of thing we'll be doing at GOCT too. ACE. I never thought I'd be able to speak about England, sparing the blushes of my English colleagues here, because since the year 2000, I think 1999 actually, the Nazi report, England has been languishing in the slow lane, but we're coming up for air at last. And in 2019, Andreas and Stefan came over to help us launch the Durham Commission, which really helpfully distinguishes between the abstract noun creativity and the creative skills that inhabit the real world of kids at school, and then the intentionality, something that we found very much in the OECD work, that you need to have, and Charles Vidal's work has found this too, if you're really going to systematically, intentionally embed this in every web and weft of the co-curriculum, the core curriculum, and of course the informal and extra curriculum. One of the things, here's another idea you might want to take, Scotland has one of these too, is there needs to be a national place where you can showcase great stuff. So a teacher just has one click, and I can go and see a teacher like me teaching science, here's what they're doing. And that's what the Creativity Exchange, funded by Arts Council England, is doing. In a small way, we're mirroring the work that Stefan and colleagues has done with 8 creativity collaboratives, about 100 schools across England, significantly funded over 3 years, an external evaluator, a serious intervention, about 100 schools, 20,000 to 40,000 pupils. We're going to be able to say something about what works, what quite works, and what doesn't work, so that we can share that back with the system. At last, you might say. Many of the creativity collaboratives are seeing this as a way of bringing themselves together as a professional learning community. So up in the Northeast, they've branded themselves using the 5 habits of our model. Now, it's been my privilege, too, to work with colleagues in China. And this relationship with China, as you've seen from the first 2 speakers, is really powerful. GEOCT grew out of a teacher exchange initiative, and now we're going faster and deeper. And as you heard earlier on, the 2035 China curriculum is opening up doors that were not there. This work, done in Shanghai, in 2 districts, in Jiading and Pudong, was extracurricular. But it links with problem-based learning, and it links with the local employment, real problems being faced by real schools in those areas of Shanghai. Another example, in Finland, we've had Finland mentioned already. We've had the phenomenological approach, but I think what I'm particularly interested in, you can see this in some of the Scandinavian countries, especially, not exclusively, is this interest in multidisciplinarity, or should it be transdisciplinarity, Pam? I'm not sure. But you cannot evade the secondary system without doing something that might be called a project, or something that might be conferring more student agency on you as an individual. I think this is really exciting. I think, as Andreas was suggesting, we can't go too fast sometimes. Otherwise, we don't bring our teaching colleagues with us, and we look rather fluffy and vague, and we fall on our feet. This is not fluffy. We've got really good proofs of concept, really good emerging evidence that we can use. India is a really good example, doing some work there largely in the STEM space, but their new curriculum is about as radical as it can get in terms of the way that India was framing what it was doing. Here's a direct quotation. "We want our schools to be," I never thought I'd hear this, "more holistic, inquiry-based, discovery-based, and full of discussion-based learning." This is radical. So this is not a slight tweak. Oh, we used to teach reading and now we're going to do a bit of work on phonics. It's not like that. This is my 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional world. That's why it's scary. That's the answer. Why, if you move from the certainties about which you can put your arms to this stuff, it's quite scary. But I think for most of us who want to get to the southern hemisphere and we're sailing from the north, we need to know that the earth is round, and therefore triangulate and use evidence from the learning sciences, I would suggest, to help us do that more effectively. We have a colleague from Ireland here who's going to say more later on, Kenneth Nally. And I think the way that Ireland has gone is to say, never mind this education business, let's brand the whole country as Creative Ireland. This is right, isn't it, Kenneth? And you know, so education is the genuine servant of both the economic prosperity and the well-being of the nation. A lovely idea, and we'll hear more about that as we go through. Korea, too, has had a long-standing statement of intent. It's very difficult as a researcher to find out precisely what's going on. But they talk, and I like this phrase very much, about raising a creative person, one of the most important goals of education. That's kind of like a redefinition of Reggio Emilia, isn't it? You know, the global village is the parent of this creative child in Korea. Lovely idea. Norway, I think we had mentioned earlier on, again, really nice statement of intent here. The word joy. You know, we need a bit of that, colleagues, don't we? We've written something, my friend Ellen Spencer and I, about the zest that we need to put back into learning, zest for learning. Well, you know, these should not be seen as opposite, should they? This is where you get student engagement, when they're hungry to learn. Pupils must be allowed to use their creative energy throughout their entire schooling. Well, wouldn't that be a wonderful idea? It's going to happen. Our colleagues in Scotland have led the way with their Scottish Curriculum for Excellence, and they have a number of initiatives that we can learn from. They have the kind of website that we've been talking about, regularly updated action plans so that you can call the education department to account. So it's out there as a matter of public record. We're going to do this. Did we do it? Yes, no. Ireland's taken a similar approach, really powerfully important, and beginning to list the other partners, because we can't do, no one entity can do this. They also, I should say at this stage, we don't get to the letter W, Wales, but Wales are doing terrific things too. Often learning from the Australian experience too. We've had Singapore mentioned. Critical and inventive, there's another synonym there. Inventive learning, that's another way of looking at this. You've got the theme, haven't you? I'm nearly at the end of the alphabet, because you'll glaze over if I show you another circular diagram. In the United States, we found it hardest, and I'm really looking forward to Laura and having good conversations with her already about this. And Robert Bagetto and James Kaufman helpfully built on Anna Kraft's work of thinking, because one of the things that puts teachers off is that, you know, if I'm a genius, I can do this, but I couldn't possibly do this. It's not learnable. So it's really important. That is a big picture learning continuum, isn't it? So mini C creativity is when the 5-year-old in your class does something for the first time, and it's truly original for her, in her context. It's not original in the great scheme of things. Everyday creativity is what we exercise in our lives and what we're going to be looking at in schools. Professional creativity is a bit like kind of Anders Ericsson's work on deliberate practice. When you're so skilled, not the 10,000 hours, that's a bit of a myth, but when you're so deeply invested in it that you're professional. And then that very small number of individuals who are geniuses, or genii, whichever you like. One of the carriers in the States has been the deeper learning movement. And Laura, I know, has things to say about that, so I'm not going to steal her thunder. And also, Laura's work at Stanford, really, the whole Masters of Creativity, elevating of status, is another driver for this kind of interest. Now, I just have not done justice to this, partly because it's so micro in the States, so many small districts, often with 1, 2, 3, 4 schools in. It's very difficult to get a fix. I could have talked about EL. There are a number of other really interesting carriers. So, moving across from left to right, I'm now looking at curriculum design and pedagogy, and looking at some core principles. And I think here you get to the stage of realizing that this is a significant cultural shift. I'm delighted that we've got a number of head teachers here, but not much of school life, as I know it, especially as you get up to age 15, is problem-based and extended in length. It's bound by 50-minute or 1-hour sections, and when you move from geography, you go out to play. In some dreadful environments, you walk in silence out to play. In others, you go off into another learning environment and have a really stimulating experience. That it is predominantly social. Now, we'll still have to measure it from the individual perspective, but schools aren't set up to be predominantly social because that's called cheating. That's when the child X puts her hands around something and says, get away, that's my work, that's my work. And our exam systems are predicated, as Andrea said, on individual heroic acts in the Southern Hemisphere at one time of the year, in the Northern Hemisphere, utterly unage-related, largely using tests of recall, largely using a pencil. Well, how preposterous. Increasingly interdisciplinary, that's been said, and here's the difficult thing. Where appropriate, where possible, co-design. That's how you'll get agency. You look at all the other things that kids are doing, don't expect to be given it and told to do it. They'll say, well, get on your bike, go and do something else. I want something that's really going to engage with me. We've had a go at mapping at a very detailed level, the kind of signature pedagogies that we know work. Some of you will recognize some of those things. Stefan has had a go, and these are just a summary of about 14 we came up with. Just 8 approaches. There's no lack of understanding here. I could adduce several of my colleagues in the UK who've done fantastic work on this. And if we were in the staff room, over a cup of tea, we'd probably be talking about this kind of thing. We wouldn't be using the word signature pedagogy. I'm getting a little look to my left. I think that means 2 minutes, so I'll accelerate. So we kind of know this. If we measure it, is the fear of some teachers, it'll disappear. Or if creativity is what it is to be human, which it is, if we kind of give you a level 3B, that's outrageous, which it is. That's not what we're talking about doing. We're trying to get more precise at evidencing the growth of creative thinking in young people. Why would you not do that? You wouldn't expect a scientist to come in and say, well, it's kind of, yeah, your knowledge of acids and bases is kind of coming along. You wouldn't expect that. You'd expect a detailed, rigorous understanding of the process. In Australia, back into the state of Victoria, they've been doing this kind of thing. I've been privileged to be working with them. So since 2015, we've been running tests online, authentic, scenario-based tests of creative thinking. And here we are with not quite the equivalent of the Times, Rachel, but the Melbourne Age, a serious broadsheet in communicating with parents. We've got to carry parents and employers with us on this. Nearly there. I would be if it moves forward. And we're delighted to be working now in England with the Australian Council for Educational Research, taking some of their work and translating it into work in England. Here's work we've been doing in Perth, in Western Australia, developing a toolkit, a field guide, if you like, a formative assessment process that any teacher knew. All of this is free to air, so very happy to share all of this afterwards. In Australia, this is where assessment is going, in my view. It's now national policy that we're going to have kids not leaving just with an ATAR score, but with a digital learner profiler. You're learning LinkedIn. Why would you not in a digital age? We're moving in the same place, so Rethink Assessment, an organisation with Peter Hyman I'm proud to have co-founded. We have a prototype being tested in schools right now, and it was delightful that when Rachel's commission, you'll hear more from Rachel Sylvester later on, picked up on this and made this one of her recommendations, and also really picked up to on the importance of creativity and critical thinking. Very, very nearly there. The last gasp, and it's only one or at most two slides, which is this whole professional learning mountain we've got to climb, and how it's a real shift in the way we're going here. It is, if not an Everest, it's an Eiger, or it's a big hill outside here. We know quite a lot of its ingredients, but we don't quite yet know how best to do this systematically at scale, at the macro level and at the micro level. And that, colleagues, is the challenge. And it will, as Barack Obama said, not wait. We are the people, the actors in this drama who can make it happen. And if that sounds a bit polemic and evangelical, I'm delighted. Thank you for listening to me.